Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we turn to one of the great books of Latin Roman literature by examining the laws of Cicero. Cicero is the most important of the so-called Roman philosophers. A Roman Platonist and Stoic, he is responsible for attempting to synthesize strands of Platonic and Stoic thought into a coherent body of mostly political philosophy. It may not be far-fetched to assert that Cicero is the first synthetic political philosopher and the second systematic political philosopher in the Western tradition after Plato. The origins of classical natural law and right are contained in the books of the laws, of which the first book is the most important and influential. Those with a solid grounding or education in Catholic natural law theology, from Augustine to, say, Aquinas and beyond, may find resonances and recognize why Cicero was held in such high regard by the Catholic theologians and philosophers. It wasn't just because of his remarkable Latin prose. There are a few things to know about Cicero in relationship to his larger philosophical anthropology, which is important when reading the laws. He was, like Plato and Aristotle, a philosophical monotheist. He found religion as useful only insofar that it provided stability and heritage, but he largely found the actual teachings and the rituals of the local cults to be insufficient in comparison to the true God of reason. That said, he never advocated the abolition of the Roman pantheon because he knew better than to offend the plebeians, who can easily be riled up into a frenzy, and Cicero, having lived during and through the tumultuous civil wars, the final decades of the Roman Republic, would have known all too well how easy it was to get the plebeians into a frenzy. Cicero's humanism and natural law theory is ultimately tied to his philosophical monotheism, or at least to his idea of the highest God being the God of reason, who is supreme over all the other spirits. And this understanding, much like in Catholicism, that humans are sharers in the divine nature through the gift of reason, is what makes Cicero such an important figure in Western intellectual thought. Hence, Cicero's humanism is rooted in the primacy of logos, or reason, which is a gift of divinity and makes humans, compared to all other creatures and animals on earth, like God. For Cicero, as per natural law theory, what constitutes natural law is the governing force behind human action. While happiness, or ontological flourishing, is the telos to human existence in Cicero's mind, what allows us to reach this end in life is reason itself. As Cicero, through the character Marcus in the Laws, writes, "There is no topic which brings out so clearly what nature has bestowed on man, how many excellent things the human mind contains, what sort of factor unites humans, and what natural fellowship exists between them." This is the beginning of Cicero's exploration into natural law, the divine gift of reason, and why reason is what permits humans to march toward excellence and ultimately to happiness and flourishing. Accordingly, the natural law in Cicero is what unites humanity together in a common spirit. This common spirit is tied to want for wisdom and knowledge, which is principally manifested through the common gift of reasoning, which is implanted into all persons, which is known as the soul. Furthermore, the natural law calls humanity together through the pursuit of justice and happiness, and how justice and happiness are tied together and subservient to reason. The natural law and reason is ultimately communitarian in nature, or perhaps we might understand it as social in nature, and aims at social virtue, intimate and deep participation with others in a common project called the homeland or the fatherland, or, as we know from Cicero's other writings, the republic. This is generally remembered as the classical natural law theory, in which natural law can be sufficiently understood by human reason, and that, in this understanding of the natural order of things, the order of nature and what our nature desires, which is an embrace of one's nature, the end to our existence, happiness, can ultimately be manifested through a combination of knowledge and action which manifests that knowledge to the flourishing of nature. Cicero recognizes the same claim made in Judaism and ultimately later in Christianity through Genesis concerning what Abrahamic religion calls the imago Dei, or the image of God. While Cicero doesn't call it that in his works, the idea, the anthropology behind it is otherwise the same. Christianity developed, through Augustine, the idea of the substantive view of the imago Dei. This is the belief that the soul is the mind, and that this soul or mind has the imparted gift of grace, called reason, who is Christ, which makes us, literally, by our very composition, sharers in the divine image of the Trinity. For Cicero, writing several centuries earlier, human reason, as he states, is a gift from God. Again, while he doesn't use the term imago Dei, we can see the same similarities in what he writes. There is nothing better, Cicero says, than reason, and reason is present in both man and God. There is a primordial partnership in reason between man and God. He also states, in debates on the nature of man, it is usually maintained, doubtless correctly, that in the course of the continuous circuits and revolutions of the heavens, the right moment arrived for sowing the human race, that after being scattered and sown in the earth, it was further endowed with the divine gift of the mind, that whereas men derived the other elements in their makeup from their mortal nature, elements which are fragile and transitory, their mind was implanted in them by God. According to Cicero, then, the means by which we come to know ourselves and the natural law and ultimately the world is through right reason. As he says, but those who share also share right reason, and since that is law, we men must also be thought of as partners with God in the laws. The primary impetus of Cicero's natural law and right reasoning to coming to know the natural law is morality. The law is moral, and coming to know the law through right reasoning is what permits humans to attain moral excellence. And this is what ultimately leads to growth in virtue and the proper dispensation of justice, which is what the natural law and nature ultimately aims for. So there is a moral end to the law and to human reason. Reason, then, is the highest calling for humanity. As he writes, there is, therefore, a similarity between man and God. This similarity is not found in the fact that God's nature is the same as our own, but that we share creativity, reason, and reason itself. Furthermore, Cicero eschews the arguments of chance, much like Aristotle. Nature must have a purpose. It cannot be the product of mere chance. And purpose is the opposite of chance circumstance or outcome. As he writes, nature has lavished such a wealth of things on men for their use and convenience that every growing thing seems to have been given to us on purpose. It does not come into existence by chance or folly. The fact that humans have the gift of reason is what separates us from the rest of the world. Reason, in fact, the one thing in which we are superior to the beasts, Cicero writes, which enables us to make valid deductions, to argue, refute our opponents, debate, solve problems, draw conclusions, that certainly is common to all humanity. This is also a claim, as those know who have studied theology, that is made in Genesis. The most important aspect of this gift of reason, beyond coming to know ourselves in nature, is that humans have a mental agility. Wisdom has provided us with senses which act as its servants and messengers. Here we also see Cicero's epistemology forming, if we can call it that, which is essentially a synthesis of Aristotelian a posteriori empiricism and Platonic a priori rationality. We have innate ideas, but our senses are what allow us to experience and confirm our ideas, or to deny our ideas to prove that they are wrong, and ultimately allow us to grow in wisdom and knowledge when our innate ideas and our experiences and observations in the world coincide together. While Cicero extols the gift of reason as the basis for our coming to know the natural law, nature, ourselves, and the enacting of true justice, he also warns against the struggle against false beliefs, or the world of opinions, very reminiscent of Plato. If corrupt habits and foolish opinions did not twist and turn aside our feeble minds from their original paths, no individual would be more like himself than everyone would be like everyone else. Thus, however one defines man, the same definition ultimately applies to all. Man is the rational animal. Here, Cicero recognizes the same problem seen by later generations of theologians and philosophers and students of the human condition. If we have the capacity for reason, why is it that we often fail to embrace our nature or our reason? For Cicero, the struggle is a battle between truth and opinion, between nature and convention. This is what defines the world we live in and the ascent toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. False beliefs lead to corrupt habits. False beliefs also lead to ignorance, principally of one's own nature. This ignorance leads to a contest within oneself between the struggle of nature and anti-nature. Ignorance leads to fear, uncertainty, and confusion, and ultimately to chaos. In this fear, uncertainty, and confusion, which is the result of not knowing one's nature, Cicero writes, "Troubles and joys, desires and fears, haunt the minds of all alike." Our minds are haunted from our own ignorance, and in this haunting fear, we engage in wrongful praise, wrongful assertions, and embrace the world of opinion to try and soothe our fears, rather than to seek the embrace of our own nature, which is the only pathway out of the constant fears and hauntings of our minds. Those who are familiar with Stoicism should be able to see the Stoic influence on Cicero when concerning the nature between knowledge and falsity, and how this impacts human life and existence. Our corruption of having fallen into false beliefs, the world of opinions, or as Plato would have it, the world of the cave, is what prevents our coming to know the natural law, which also prevents us from embracing our nature and enacting justice and enjoying the fruits of happiness in life. Cicero then turns to a critique of self-interested action as the ultimate form of corrupt opinions. In this, he is simply re-engaging the sophists of Plato and Aristotle's era and arguing against their views that self-interested action is what is ultimately just, an argument made by Glaucon in Book 2 of Plato's Republic, and that no one follows any laws because they will break it if they think they will gain the advantage in not following any laws. Hence, if you don't follow the law, It is not really law at all, Cicero claims. Properly speaking, Cicero's natural law theory is a synthetic unity of phusos and nomos, of nature and convention. Proper convention and laws ought to correspond to nature. Our laws should aim at the promulgation of nature through virtue, which we all seek and we will all find happiness in. Having completed his commentary on the nature of reason and how reason, as the divine spark, as Plato says through Socrates, is what allows us to come to know ourselves and the world, Cicero now turns his attention to how our coming to know the natural law leads to virtue, and why virtue has a contingent relationship to nature itself. This continues what he had begun to outline in the preceding paragraphs concerning the contest between nature and convention, reason and anti-reason, truth and opinion. Concerning the relationship of virtue and nature, Cicero makes the fundamental claim, as one would expect, that virtue is sought in of itself because it is ultimately what is natural. We seek virtue because instinctively we know that virtue is what will make us happy, and happiness is the purpose of human life, and therefore of reason itself. Our reason aims at the accruement of happiness through virtue. Virtue is also moral, so virtue is bound up with the moral purpose of the natural law as well. We do not seek virtue for praise and adoration of others, although they might follow and itself reflect the truth of virtue and being natural and the virtuous individual. We might receive praise precisely because we are virtuous and knowledgeable people, but we never seek virtue for the purpose of praise and adoration. That is simply a secondary or a peripheral outcome of our attainment of virtue. In being recognized by the crowd, we might, however, awaken the crowd's moral stupor to pursue virtue for themselves. So here Cicero says that while we should never seek the praise of others, when others praise us because we are virtue, it may help them become aware of why they do not live happy lives. They will live a happy life because they emulate the virtuous individual they are praising. And that ultimately is a good thing. But if we seek praise and adoration for itself, we are ultimately cut off from others, self-centered, and engaged in a form of self-idolatry. That is the ultimate difference between true virtue and false virtue. True virtue aims at helping others without any concern for one's own praise and adoration. False virtue is trying to get the praise of others and nothing more than that. Just as Cicero explained that patriotism is a natural product of one's social animus in the Republic, so too does Cicero believe patriotism is virtuous and natural. What room will there be for patriotism, he writes, or for the wish to serve others or to show gratitude? These virtues are rooted in the fact that we are inclined by nature to have a regard for others, and that this is the basis of justice. Since justice is linked to nature and virtue is linked to nature, the virtuous person is also the just person, by definition. This is an aspect of patriotism at its fundamental core. Through the love of one's land, which is natural and therefore virtuous, one is moved to be just to his fellow countrymen as a result. Those who otherwise seek to destroy the natural and care not about their fellow countrymen are, by definition, unvirtuous. But they are unvirtuous because they are ultimately self-interested, because, as we've said before, virtue aims at improving others. Therefore, we can say that all virtue, that is, true virtue, is the product of nature, and reason allows us to access it. Through the embrace of one's nature, one can attain the cardinal virtues, the foremost of those cardinal virtues being justice itself. Yet to return to the world of false belief and opinion, is still problematic. Confusion remains a thorn in the side of virtue and nature. Confusion is what corrupts the soul and alienates us from ourselves, and the calling of nature to embrace our own nature, in which our happiness is to be manifested in a community with other people. The struggle for reason, the struggle for knowledge, the struggle to embrace one's nature is the struggle to achieve moral virtue and excellence in life. The struggle to achieve moral excellence is also the highest good, according to Cicero, since it is through moral excellence, which is the highest embodiment of nature, that joy and happiness is found for all human beings. Hence, our entire life is aimed at the struggle to attain the highest possible good. As Cicero aptly states, in language that cannot be misunderstood by even the youngest of his readers, quote, "The highest good is either to live according to nature, i.e. to enjoy a life of moderation governed by moral excellence, or to follow nature and live, so to speak, by her law, i.e. as far as possible to omit nothing in order to achieve what nature requires, which means the same as this, to live, as it were, by the code of moral excellence. To embrace one's nature through the right use of reason is the pathway to the good life, to the moral life, and to happiness itself." The end of the first book concludes with Cicero's proclamation that philosophy helps us understand our place in the natural world, and that it also helps us understand our fundamental nature. We cannot avoid the fact that Cicero's humanism, as all proper humanisms are, is rooted in his belief in a fundamental nature. You cannot be a humanist, as many modern humanists claim, without there being a human nature that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. You cannot, properly speaking, be a humanist unless you have a human nature that you can manifest. Yes, there are many self-declared humanists who are, in fact, anti-humanists because they follow confusion and chaos rather than nature and truth. They follow the world of opinion rather than the actual world of nature. If that's you, you're a transhumanist or a post-humanist and should start using the correct words and descriptions to describe yourself, lest you be a proponent of universalizing false opinion, which is the pinnacle of tyranny. This follows Cicero's belief in political philosophy that philosophy was the handmaiden to politics. Likewise, philosophy is the handmaiden to understanding nature, since philosophy is about the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and understanding wisdom itself. Since we have already established from the beginning of the first book that this is what reason aims for, the good, the true, the beautiful, wisdom and moral excellence, and understanding of nature, it naturally follows that Cicero would see philosophy as the gateway to understanding nature and our place in the cosmos. Readers of Plotinus and also Augustine will recognize the introspection that is essential to Cicero. The person who knows himself will first of all realize that he possesses something divine, and he will compare his own inner nature to a kind of holy image placed in a temple. The coming to know thyself is simultaneously the discovery of divinity, which is implanted in our soul by the gift of reason. From this coming to know thyself, which is the coming to know nature and God, once the mind, on perceiving and recognizing the virtues, Cicero writes, and once it has been put behind fear of pain and death, and entered a loving fellowship with its own kind, he's talking about entering the fellowship with fellow humans there, regarding as its own kind all who are akin by nature, the same mind examines the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all the nature of things, and perceives where they have come from, and where they will return. Cicero is arguing here that once we begin to understand nature, we begin the scientific process of observing the world, the heavens, the earth, and the sea, to have a knowledge of all things, where they come from, and where they will go. Cicero is claiming that humanity, as at the top of the natural pyramid of the world, is because we have the ability to know, to use reason, to catalog the world. The word catalog in Greek is broken down into katalogon, which can be translated as according to reason. Once humanity, through philosophy, understands itself and the natural world, humans can begin to catalog and grow in knowledge of the world. We are called, in the end, to participate with reason itself. Through our coming to know our nature and place within the natural world, we can begin to order ourselves in the world we live and live a life according to the nature we have been given. This is achieved through knowledge. Knowledge is achieved through right reason and right reasoning, which is the imparted gift of the transcendent to us. Cicero's humanism, natural law, and embrace of nature is decidedly anthropocentric. There is, in other words, something very special, even divine, about being a human being. Nature is calling us to moral excellence. It is calling us to be just, to form a society that is excellent in its moral virtues and just in its relationship to each other. It is a calling to knowledge, a calling to truth. It is a calling us into union with truth and nature itself. And all of this is made possible through the gift of reason, which is what fundamentally distinguishes us from the rest of creation. Cicero's commentary in the first book of the Laws was his most important, though the latter two books are equally important to rounding out the natural law and its relationship to political society. We must remember that Cicero was living in the time of the Roman civil wars, and he witnessed the republic's downfall into dictatorship through the march of Julius Caesar. You can also see through the lines that Cicero's reflections on nature, the natural law, and the human soul is also a commentary on the nature of politics. He believes that political societies decline when they fall into confusion and chaos, when we pursue opinion rather than truth and reason. That said, Cicero's declaration that the natural law can be known by reason, and this right reasoning is principally concerned with the attainment of moral excellence, and from this, happiness is consummated, was what was mostly influential. Although Cicero was intending his work to have a political consequence or a political persuasion, the real legacy of Cicero was his establishment of the study of human nature through the natural law. But the most important contribution of Cicero's natural law theory, contained in the Book of the Laws, is that the natural law is, by its own definition, something moral. Thus, the embrace of nature and living in accord to the natural law would make the world, theoretically at least, a better and more moral place to be. And we all know that if we lived in a better and more moral place, we would all be happier. Whether we achieved this remains in doubt. Cicero, however, would likely claim that the failure to see this manifested in the world is a result of corrupt reasoning. We just haven't reasoned enough. A rejection of nature and of human nature, and the embrace of the world of opinion. In other words, it is easier to live the false life than it is to live the truthful life. As we mentioned, reason, although humans possess it, is not something that comes with the snap of a finger. We must struggle to achieve the right use of reason. We must struggle to become virtuous. We must struggle to attain excellence. This takes time. This takes energy. This takes a lot of effort. Most people may not be willing to engage in that struggle and therefore fall back into the world of opinion and live a false happy life in ignorance. But for those who struggle and labor, for those who use right reason and gain excellence, whether rich or poor, whether involved in politics or living on the farm, those who achieve moral virtue and excellence will live the happy life.